Good afternoon. I'm not going to repeat the name of that title right now. I will say, so this is, I'm going to present some preliminary work here that is based off a USDA funded project that was conducted in collaboration with people from KU at the Kansas Geological Survey and at K-State. As well as my graduate research assistant when I was at K-State, spent a lot of time working on this. So this was through Project SAFECAW, which is, I literally have to look at this and read because I can't remember the name, but it stands for Sustainable Adaptations to the Future Environment of Kansas Agriculture and Water. It's a mouthful, nobody can remember it. SAFECAW it is. And I neglected, to put up here, Missouri Water Center. I'm here representing Missouri Water Center, so let it be noted. So this project is one where we're really focused on thinking about how climate is connected to the socio-environmental system that's within this Kansas River Basin. Part of this project, we're looking at simulating agricultural productivity using mechanistic models. That's the K-State team right now, and then using that to then help us project forward what that's going to mean for water quality, what that changes to water use in agriculture might mean for water quality, water quantity, but then also what those impacts of agricultural productivity, water use, water quality might be on the socioeconomic systems for these rural agricultural towns. So the study was conducted for the eastern Kansas River Basin. So this is along the Kansas River running from just west of Manhattan, Kansas. So all the way to Kansas City. And this is a basin that is heavily agricultural. So we have a whole lot of corn and soy production, particularly concentrated around the alluvial aquifer around the river, as well as then as you move up to the northern part of that river basin where we just have a little bit more rainfall, a little more precipitation conditions. Now this presentation is kind of a mismatch of two separate things. So I'm going to talk sort of about our project process a little, and then some of the results that have been coming out of my team here. A big focus of the project is interacting with the stakeholders in the river basin and really trying to learn from and with those stakeholders. So this is an example of what we call a jam board coming out of one of our annual meetings with our stakeholder groups, where we sit down with them, we present what we have, and we ask them what they really need, right? What they really want. So our first stakeholder meeting, we asked them to draw us concepts maps for what they thought resilience in the system and for agricultural water futures would mean in this place. And we've used that then to sort of adjust and shift our efforts as we move through the years of this project. This is our fourth year, I believe, in this project. Trying to see if there are places where we can shift focus, what are the places where we could potentially have more of an impact without expending a whole lot of effort. But as we moved into our last year, we really wanted to focus away from, okay, let's just do base modeling, figuring out what data we need to collect, but really thinking about, if we're thinking about water futures, what water futures are they most interested in looking at? And so at our stakeholder meeting we had in October, one of the things we asked the stakeholders to do was to think about, if this was your future, if one of these three images was the future of the Kansas River Basin, can you tell us how we got here? Right, and have them explore kind of like a hypothetical kind of backcasting. What sort of decision processes were made that led to these types of scenarios? So we worked through these scenarios with our stakeholders. We ended up with all sorts of notes about like, well, here are the potential sort of paths in the road that you could split off onto that might lead to these. This is a way for us to pull what they see as on the ground people with experience, right? Boots on the ground, folks in the watershed, what they see as being the most influential factors moving forward. And then we had a sort of a roundup here, and we created these system diagrams, sort of an elementary version of like causal loop diagrams, trying to pull together what really are these most important factors and levers potentially that we could pull to change water futures in the area. Now, going across all of our notes from all of our discussions with our stakeholders, from our diagrams that we collaboratively built together, we took all that information and tried to piece together sort of common themes across all of these different scenarios we were presented with, and condensed them down into a set of scenarios. Right, so our project is focused on climate adaptations with water use in agriculture. And we think, okay, we could do projections, and we could potentially simulate a whole bunch of different variants of every single factor that we could have in any of our models. Remember, we have people doing water quantity, water quality, as well as crop modeling, and then I'm on the socioeconomic side here, right? So we have tons of variables. This would be a huge kind of like design of thousands of models potentially. And so we use this approach to kind of narrow it down to what are some like target scenarios that the stakeholders are really most interested in to guide what are the factors we really want to think about in projecting forward. What are the potential futures we really want to understand? Right, and my part of this is trying to think about what are the impacts of some of these possible future scenarios on the agricultural economic outcomes here. And so Denise started off by pulling some of our historic data that we have for Kansas. This is just county level data. We have information where we're really trying to tie things that we can project forward with pretty good certainty and clarity using mechanistic models. So things like yields, productivity, the amount of cultivated area, and connect those back to things like farm income, farm employment that have some impact on the actual cohesion of those rural communities that are supporting the farming community. So let's see if I can point this out here. So this graph here is showing in yellow, this is farm income over time for Kansas. This is the average across counties in Kansas, right, over time. And we can see there's a little bit of scatter, but it's relatively flat. There's no positive trend. Purple is yields, on the other hand, I believe for corn in this case. And there's, again, a lot of scatter, but kind of a general upward trend, which says, well, maybe income and yield aren't really correlated. And there are lots of reasons for that, right? We've heard lots of reasons, I think, even the previous talks today that might explain some of that. We also looked at then things like planted acres cultivated. And if we look across the x-axis, we see when we have, I don't know, that's more acres planted in a county, right? More acres devoted to cultivation, then we tend to generally have higher yields, right? And we also see in the color gradient, we're going from earlier years with kind of smaller cultivation areas to higher cultivation in later years of the time period. The relationship again between income and yield is a little fuzzy. That's the size of the bubbles there. But we have sort of these complex relationships. The trends aren't super clear in that. Now, net income is one of the things we're really interested about, right? You have to have income as a farmer to continue to operate. And of course, that's really just the difference between the amount of cash receipts or revenue you receive at the end of the growing season and then your agricultural expenses. So we took a look at some of our expenses to see if, well, yields are increasing, are ag expenses also increasing over time, thereby reducing the amount of net income you might see if you had better productivity, right? And there's a whole lot of variability in here. We see things like the recessions had a huge shock in here. We have changes in global markets, all these external forces that really lead to a lot of change in these agricultural expenses over time. We compared then just the actual cash receipts versus those agricultural production expenses. Cash receipts are the reddish line that's on top. And then the greenish line is farm income, and you see they track right together, or not farm income, sorry, that's production expenses, they track right together. The tiny gap there represents net farm income, which is the blue line down at the bottom, which is a very small value and very flat for Kansas over time. If you're from Kansas and know anything about agriculture in Kansas, this is not a huge shock, right? Net farm income has not been great over the past couple decades. We also looked at compound annual growth rate, and we saw that actually, and it's hard to tell here, but there has been a pretty significant increase in seed and fertilizer expenses over the past few decades. But that's not been accompanied by an increase in farm income, which has stayed relatively flat. So we have increasing shrinkage of the profit margin. And of course, all this is because the system is really complex. It's highly variable. It's strongly influenced by these external factors. That means it's really hard for us to think about how do we project it forward. We're still going to try to do it anyway. Now, let's see. Okay. So one of the things we knew we aren't going to be able to model these exogenous shocks that are coming into the system. So we tried to put together some models that will control for some of those. So we have fixed effects models that are controlling for these annual year-to-year shocks. And really what we're trying to do is just extract the base trend that might possibly exist between things like yield and cultivated cover and net income, or the proportion of people employed within the farming sector. The modeling results, we have many models, different variants of this. Generally what we see across all these models, when we control for these annual shocks that happen year to year, when we control for things that maybe are varying across individual counties, we see that farm net income does slightly increase with higher yields and with more acres irrigated, and of course with more government payments, so supports from emergency disaster relief funds to crop insurance, things like that. Farm employment, on the other hand, doesn't really change much in a positive manner. We only see that actually farm employment is higher when you have lower yields, right? And pointed to really some trade-off here between sort of the scale of agriculture and increasing efficiency via mechanization, right? Where you might have a higher farm income just because you're hiring less labor and you have more machinery. So these models then serve the basis, they form the foundation for then some of the general trends that we're trying to forecast out. This is not ours, this is from USDA, so this is just to give you an idea of like what something like this could potentially look like. These are crop prices from USDA, and you can see in the white, that's the historical data right over time, which is a lot more variable. And then in the gray period, you have their forecast, which is like this really weird flat trend line, doesn't have that variability. Again, because we can't, USDA can't look ahead into the future and say, hey, there's gonna be this big market shift that's going on, right? There'll be a big drought and famine in Central Europe, and they're gonna need our corn, or, right? We can't see those things. So all we can forecast out are these general trends that will serve as the basis, the starting point from which any shocks would materialize. So this was our first shot at trying to do something like this. We started off, we're just trying to forecast out like net income as a starting point. In red on this right-hand side of the plot, right, we have the historic data, and then we have several different scenarios that we put together for what might happen if you have changes in yields, for changes in acreage. What happens when you have a shift between the ratio of crop production versus livestock production, things of that nature. And so this one was just based off some general starting points. We say, here's how much these things have changed in the past. Let's see what happens if we look at similar types of changes in the future. But then because we're working with a team that's been using actual climate models and climate projections to do mechanistic projections of yield, we started to work with that data. So here we're showing results from a single county for which we have these DSAT projected yields for 3 different RCPs. And they also applied 4 different water use adaptation strategies within DSAT to project these yields out. We use the yields then, right, within our statistical models for the projections forward, along with 7 different sort of government support and livestock production scenarios. And you end up with something that looks kind of like that, which is a mess. Let's just continue on. So this is blowing up some of what's in that sort of projected window there. And you can see a little bit better, we have RCP 4.5 climate scenario, RCP 8.5 climate scenario. I think the general takeaway from these was just, wow, it's noisy. We have a lot of overlap across the different scenarios. Those are the different colored lines, right? But we do see a kind of a trending downward in net farm income for that RCP 8.5 kind of near end of century conditions. It's so noisy, we don't really see a downward trend in 4.5, but you definitely do in the 8.5. Now, the version I was showing you here, this is for models that were using a 50% plant available water use scenario within DSAT. So that's sort of the status quo. This now is showing us several different panels with different types of water use adaptation built into the DSAT models. Things to point out here, at the very bottom, we have a scenario where the model uses a 75% plant available water threshold, which is a lot of water to use. There's basically no water constraints in this scenario, and it actually has, in our models, the lowest projected net incomes across all years projected and all scenarios projected. Right? It's quite low. It's sitting around this 140. This should be thousands of dollars. Right? Now, whereas then this one up top is a water scarcity scenario. This is only 25% plant available water. And it has maybe the second lowest farm net incomes, right? But better than full-on water use all the time. And you really only see a decrease in your farm net income when you start getting to RCP 8.5 end of century. All right. We also then looked at, I'm going to blow this up and we can focus a little more on splitting out these 7 scenarios. One of them is focused on increased government payments, and the other one on like an assumption of decreased government payments. So like a decreased annual percentage in allocation of those government payments over time. And let's see. The top line here is for increased government payments, go figure, right? And the bottom, this bottom set of lines for decreased government payments. And what we can, beyond that sort of larger split that we see from assuming like similar levels of change in government payment levels in the future, right? Beyond that, we see that this particular water adaptation scenario, which is a water constraint scenario, so 50% plant available water, but constrained application depth, okay? So this one is not like the water scarcity where they're hardly using any at all, but it's also not using very much water at all. Okay? So one of the lower water use scenarios actually has the best results overall for net farm income across any of these conditions that we've looked at. That's those the teal line right here, where we see the biggest highs regardless of the climate scenario, the RCP 4.5, RCP 8.5, and in comparison to those increased or decreased government support levels. So going through this, we say, wow, there's a lot that we can't really control for and know moving forward into the future, but hopefully this will help us understand kind of what are these baseline underlying trends that we'll have to deal with on top of then these exogenous shocks to the system, right? So the current policy and market structure really reduces, but it doesn't entirely eliminate those climate feedbacks on agricultural socioeconomic systems that operate through changing productivity and cultivation area, right? If they did, then we wouldn't see any statistically significant results for any of our regression models. Now, our coefficients that we estimate are very small, right? Because we have these huge exogenous shocks, but they are significant nonetheless, right? Regardless of the scenario that we look at, the net incomes are trending down under RCP 8.5, particularly as you get towards the near end of century, and particularly when you're looking at that really high water use scenario, right? Constrained water use may result in the best net incomes near the end of the century, which is good news because we're in this particular river basin, we're expecting it to become drier over time, right, over the next few decades. And of course, government payments, and probably some of these other market structure things, they really are going to have a much stronger impact on net incomes than any of our climate conditions that we're looking at here, or our adaptation scenarios. So we can, with our adaptation scenarios, kind of mitigate some of the hurt, but it will also need to be accompanied by some really strong policy supports as well. So I just want to note our team here for SafeCaught, right? All the data that came here was not even just from my team, right? By Shali Sharda, she's on this thing, but I haven't seen her around today. But her team is the one that did all the DSAT modeling. And then we, again, have a part of our team looking at water quantity, water quality outcomes that would will pull together at the end to combine with our socioeconomic information to think about optimizing scenarios for the future. So.
Thank you for that presentation, Kate. I think I followed most of it, even though I don't have an economics background. So thank you for that. We probably have time for one question for Kate, if anyone has a burning question, or we can wait till the end too.
Was there a geographic focus, or was this all across Kansas?
Yeah, so we are really focused on this Eastern Kansas River Basin. However, there's not enough data for us to build models or the socioeconomic data with just what's in Eastern Kansas River Basin. So the models that we're building are for Kansas and the entirety. We're just projecting them out, spatially explicit projections for the Eastern Kansas River Basin.
Okay.
Yeah.
Follow up, are there longer term water availability issues in Eastern Kansas like Western Kansas is going to face or is facing?
That is the expectation moving forward, right? So there's talk about the 100th meridian moving, right? And so that is actively happening. I don't think Eastern Kansas River Basin, even by the end of the century, is going to be like it is over in Western Kansas, over in Ogallala. But it's not going to be what it is today. We do have a lot of rain fed in that basin, and some of that's just not going to go anymore. So I didn't talk about this here, but part of this we're trying to look at then with our DSAT projections. Is there a yield gap kind of threshold that we need to be looking at for saying that we'd even be growing a crop here? And if you aren't, are you switching to, say, grazing, right? And then what does that mean for the incomes as well?